Okay, this is probably one of the nerdiest things I have ever made. We'll get to what this is and why it's useful in a minute, but this is all to answer one question. What is the perfect monitor size? And there really is a lot more nuance to this question than you might think. It's really not as simple as get a big monitor like this one if you use it for productivity, or get a small monitor for FPS games. That's the type of advice you hear everywhere, but honestly, it's not good advice. It's just echoing what people are used to. See, just because competitive gamers have been using small monitors for ages doesn't automatically make it the best option. So I think it's about time to challenge those monitor size recommendations based on how our visual system actually works. If you zoom out, there really are three key aspects you have to balance against each other: immersion, ergonomics, and performance. Sure, price, availability, and physical constraints are also important. Like say, if your desk is tiny, that definitely limits your monitor options. But I believe it's a good idea to first figure out what the optimum is and then dial it back later if necessary. So let's start with immersion, that feeling of actually being there in a game or movie instead of just watching through a screen. So the bigger the screen, the better, right? Well, for the most part. See, there's definitely a point where the screen just becomes too big. Like, you don't want to be that guy in the front row seat in an IMAX theater, do you? That's probably a bit too immersive for most people.
I need a massage. I can't put my neck down.
So what's the limit here? Now, the IMAX engineers themselves said that the horizontal FOV in the front seat should not exceed 120 degrees, which is literally the limit of our binocular vision. Meaning if the screen was any bigger, you wouldn't be able to see the whole screen with both eyes simultaneously. Your left eye couldn't see the right side of the screen and vice versa. So yeah, it's a good idea to use this as the absolute upper limit for screen size. Just a quick note though, the FOV we're talking about here has nothing to do with the FOV setting you find inside a game. When I say FOV, I mean how much of your actual vision the screen fills up. Now, how does a horizontal FOV of 120 degrees translate to screen size? Well, here on my 39-inch ultra-wide monitor, I'd be getting the IMAX front row experience at a viewing distance of just 33 centimeters, which, yeah, is somewhere around here, which I think is a little too close for comfort. By the way, this is a tool I made to help visualize what this actually looks like on a monitor. All these vertical lines are different theater and home theater guidelines. And you can either type in your viewing distance and check if you come close to any of these guidelines, or adjust it so that the edges of your screen line up with any of these, and check what's the distance you need. And as you can see, there's really not one single standard, but generally speaking, most industry professionals and enthusiasts seem to agree that somewhere around 40 to 60 degrees of horizontal FOV is perfect for immersion. Personally, I find 55 degrees pretty much perfect, and here's a little cheat sheet of the distance you'd need to get that with different sized screens. So that really doesn't tell us which screen size to get, at least not yet, but there's a pretty important takeaway. The ideal screen size depends on how close you can or want to sit to your screen. So how close should you even sit to your screen? I hope it's kind of obvious that sitting too close is not good for eye comfort. And that brings us to the ergonomics aspects of screen size. I never thought I'd be reading ANSI guidelines on workplace ergonomics and what the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety has to say on monitor ergonomics. But here we are, I guess. That's a few hours of my life I never get back. Anyway, good monitor ergonomics basically boil down to just a few simple key takeaways. First, this should be obvious, but you want your monitor positioned directly in front of you and not off to the side. And you want to look down ever so slightly at the screen. Ideally, the top of the monitor should be at or just below eye level. Second, don't sit too close to your monitor. Arm's length is typically fine, but that's only a very rough guideline. Sitting too close is bad for your eyes because your eye muscles have to work harder. That's because of accommodation, which is the fancy word for when the eye focuses on something, and convergence, which is the inward movement of both eyes when looking at something that's nearby. For both of these, your eye muscles have to engage, which can cause eye strain in the long run. And the easiest way to avoid this is sitting a bit farther back. There's something called the resting point of accommodation and the resting point of vergence, which is essentially the default distance of your eyes where your eye muscles are the most relaxed. And that's at roughly 80 to 112 centimeters away from the screen. So somewhere around here. And the third takeaway from the ergonomics guidelines is your monitor shouldn't be too big. But this is also where it gets a bit fuzzy. See, those guidelines don't say anything about specific monitor sizes. Instead, they state maximum vertical viewing angles that shouldn't be exceeded. The reason is that they want you to avoid excessive neck tilt. And just saying, don't use a monitor bigger than X really doesn't cut it, because a small monitor up close can actually be a lot worse for your neck than a huge monitor at a distance. When we go back to the tool, the ergonomics guidelines are shown as these blue horizontal lines. So let's say I want to sit 40 centimeters away from the screen, which would be pretty close, probably somewhere around here. So that means my monitor shouldn't be any taller than this when setting that close. According to most guidelines, something around 40 degrees of vertical FOV should be fine, which honestly is bigger than I expected. Like, this would mean I could sit 53 centimeters away from the screen, which would be fine for my neck. But this is too close for eye comfort, so we need to combine these two aspects. And funnily enough, if you can manage to sit roughly 1 meter away from your screen, which would be considered pretty much perfect for your eyes, you could pull off a 55-inch or even 65-inch 16:9 monitor, and the viewing angles would still be fine for your neck. Caveat though is you do gotta make sure that you don't look up at your screen, because that ruins ergonomics. But yeah, those people using TVs as their monitor might be onto something. I gotta say, that's really not what I expected. I always thought smaller monitors were better for ergonomics. Now, what gets really interesting though is when you take both immersion and ergonomics into account, because there actually is some kind of sweet spot here where the requirements for both overlap. See, if we take 55 degrees as the target for the horizontal FOV, because this works great for immersion, we can see that a few screen sizes hit that goal inside the range of the optimal viewing distance. That's 40-inch to 50-inch screens when we're talking 16:9 monitors, and 39-inch monitors with a 21:9 aspect ratio. And all of them stay way below 45 degrees vertical FOV, which is what we need to avoid neck pain. So there is definitely some kind of sweet spot for both immersion and ergonomics. And honestly, I find that a bit surprising. But this really makes you wonder, we're talking relatively large monitor diagonals and relatively large viewing distances, so why do competitive gamers do the exact opposite then? For some reason, almost all of them are using small monitors, and some of them are sitting so close that you gotta wonder if they're trying to smell their opponents. Now, your first instinct is probably the pros are using small monitors because they want to keep the entire screen in their direct vision. Like, you hear that argument a lot. It makes sense that you want to see the edges of your screen or the minimap at a glance. I mean, you really don't want to have to move your head to see if an enemy pops into frame on the left side or the right side of your screen. So yeah, a small monitor seems like the logical choice. The thing is though, did you see how close most pros are setting to their monitors? Sure, they're using small 24-inch screens, but you know, with that viewing distance, the screen is actually massive. What your eyes really care about is how much of your vision is filled by the screen and not how large the screen is physically. See, a 24-inch monitor, a 32-inch monitor, or even a 50-inch TV can all fill the same area of your field of view, just at a different viewing distance. So if you place them in just the right spot, they're effectively the same size to your eyes. So the real question is not what's the best screen size for gaming, but rather what's the best FOV if you want to optimize your gaming performance. And you know, it's kind of hard to find reliable data for what FOV the pros are actually using. It's pretty rare that someone actually whips out a measuring tape so that we could properly calculate that. So here's my educated guess from everything I could find online, from analyzing videos and photos of tournaments to watching setup videos. And it's that most competitive players use a horizontal FOV between 50 and 90 degrees. Remember, that's not the in-game FOV setting. It's how much of your field of view the screen covers. And of course, there is the occasional outlier that uses a pretty extreme FOV, but I think 50 to 90 degrees is a good estimate. And that FOV range is very interesting because it's probably no coincidence that most pros slot into that range. Watch this. At the far end of that range, when you go for a 50-degree FOV, what you're really doing is making sure that everything stays in your near peripheral vision. That's this light blue circle right here. All this is what you see when your monitor covers 50 degrees of your FOV. And this near peripheral vision zone now extends just to the edges of your screen. And this is actually the zone where you can still detect motion pretty well. In this zone, it's hard to judge how fast something is moving or its exact path, but the important thing is that you can still detect motion here, even if the movement itself is relatively slow. And that's an important skill for gaming. If we move closer to the screen, targeting that 90-degree FOV, the advantage now is that targets or your enemies now appear larger on screen. You can focus your best vision on a tiny spot for precise aim or to detect and react to the tiniest movements. But that comes with a trade-off, because the edges of the screen are now only covered by our medium peripheral vision, which is a lot worse at making out details. Movements still register though, but only if they're relatively fast. So you probably won't catch anyone sneaking up on you from the side in this zone. And this zone is also how far our eyes can even physically move. If you want to focus on anything outside of the circle, you gotta move your head. So if you want to keep the whole screen inside, this is basically the limit. So it really makes sense that pros are using FOVs in this range. But for a 24.5-inch monitor, that would mean a viewing distance of 58 to just 27 centimeters, which really isn't the best for your eyes, which makes you wonder, why aren't they just using larger screens and sitting farther away for the same effective FOV? See, if we take 70 degrees as sort of a middle ground, you gotta be 39 centimeters away from a 24.5-inch screen, but you can sit at a comfortable distance of 79 centimeters with a 50-inch screen, and you'd get the exact same FOV and likely perform exactly the same or even better than with a smaller monitor. And I'm not just saying this has actually been formally tested. In this study, researchers had participants playing a kind of aim training scenario on different monitor sizes ranging from 13 to 65 inches, but they kept the FOV constant. They moved the monitor and literally fixed the participants' heads. And guess what? The smallest monitor up close performed significantly worse than the largest screen sizes at a distance. At screen sizes above 26 inches, the improvements got smaller and smaller, so unfortunately a larger monitor doesn't automatically make you a better gamer. But this makes one thing very clear. Larger monitors are not worse for gaming performance. Okay, this is where the whole thing gets a little controversial, I feel, because if you put all of this together, the ideal screen size for work, movies, and even for competitive gaming is not a 24 or 27-inch monitor. Quite far from that actually. The ideal monitor size might literally be a TV-sized display. I know that sounds kinda insane, but bear with me for a second, because when you look at it objectively, it totally makes sense. See, from roughly 1 meter away, which we know is a pretty ideal distance to avoid eye strain, a 50-inch 16:9 screen gives you a 55-degree horizontal FOV, and that's basically right in the sweet spot for immersion. Move a little closer, say to about 80 centimeters, and you're right in the middle of the competitive FOV range. And unlike with a 24-inch monitor, you don't have to play like you're trying to headbutt the screen. Of course, there are some very real limitations and downsides to this though. See, I have a pretty standard desk that's 80 centimeters deep, so I won't be able to pull off a 50-inch screen here. And with a 16:9 aspect ratio, a 50-inch screen would be over 60 centimeters tall, so I would have to look up to see the top part of the screen, which wouldn't be ideal. That's a real limitation for regular desk setups. So if we take screen height and desk depth into account, a 40-inch screen would be way more realistic. And for a regular desk setup, a 40-inch screen is probably about as close to the theoretically perfect screen size as it's gonna get. The runner-up is a 39-inch ultra-wide monitor like this one with a 21:9 aspect ratio. For gaming, you gotta move a little closer, but ergonomically that's still a lot better than using a tiny 24-inch screen. So yeah, no matter how you look at it, the theoretically ideal screen size is actually pretty large. But after all, you also gotta find a monitor that fits your desk and fits your wallet. And other specs matter too. Like good luck finding a 40 or 50-inch screen with a 540Hz refresh rate. If you want something like that, you gotta stick to 24 or 27-inch monitors, at least for the time being. But if you want the ideal screen size, you gotta go bigger than that. And I guess I probably have to start reviewing TVs now. Anyway, thanks for watching, bis zum nächsten Video.